entertainment. And I wanted to go into a narrative that I feel like I'm starting to understand pretty clearly. And it's one that they're obviously just going full throttle with the Niners here. Now, I've done 2 videos so far. A preseason video, which I believe had the Niners. I know it had the Niners, and I believe it was the Ravens both going to the Super Bowl, had the Niners winning that. And then I made another video, and I think the Broncos, I kicked out the Broncos in favor of the Chiefs, who I conceded, okay, they're probably going to make the playoffs. And the NFC side, the only change was kicking out the Panthers back in week 3 in favor of the Falcons, because the Dion theory, I do think all of his teams will make the playoffs. So, looking around the league and what they're doing, I am seeing some serious WWE booking. In WWE, what they do is they push people, obviously, and they'll have them go over in very convincing ways. And some people they push, obviously, harder than others, and some are more blatant than others. What this team, this 49ers team, is reminding me of is the 2007 Patriots team, where they just ran roughshod through the league. There's no, like, outside of an injury, real or fake, and like I always cover them with wrestling logic, so there's just nothing, in my opinion, that would have this team looking weak or where another team is going to beat them. I'm not saying they're going to go undefeated, but they are far and away better than any team in the league. Now, you'd think that would strengthen my resolve in the Niners, because I've had them since last year. I had them doing it, and they didn't. I went into the Niners redemption story. So many guys like Debo, Fred Warner, he paid their dues. They are ready for a championship, and I have no doubt that they're going to get there. Now, at first, and I admittedly said in the AFC it was murky. Part of me thought the Ravens, part of me thought the Raiders. Both have a lot of symbolism with them this year. Also, what's interesting is somebody pointed out that I had the Niners winning the Super Bowl, doing really well this year. Meanwhile, I've yet to pick right on a Niners game, so I find that interesting. That stuff happens to me all the time. Same with Dion. We missed the first 3 weeks like terribly, but got all of his NFL teams. So we had the Dion theory, but we just couldn't figure out if he was going to win or lose. The last 2 weeks we've been on fire with Dion. So I think it's just a matter of again, understanding kind of where they're pushing these teams. I genuinely believe the Niners are going to the Super Bowl still. So that really leaves one possibility, in my opinion, for the AFC. Because if the Niners go, there's really nobody to match them. Like, I don't think, even if it's Niners Jacksonville, you got like an underdog story. And I talked about having first versus last, right? You'd have Trevor, the first overall pick versus the last overall pick. It kind of sells itself, but it's going to remind me of like the Cardinals when they played the Steelers, even though the Cardinals won that game. It was just, people weren't that interested in that game because the Cardinals really weren't supposed to get there. And they don't do that often. So you can get Niners-Ravens, sure, a rematch. But the way these two teams look, is that going to be a draw? Right now there's only one team, and you probably know where I might be getting at with this, that makes any sense to play the 49ers. And it's a pretty big concession on my part because, again, I had this team not making the playoffs. But if you really think about it, the very first week of the season, we had the Chiefs come out. I think I clicked on the wrong. Here we go. We had the Chiefs come out. And here's another prediction that's boding pretty well. I had the Vikings before the season started, and a bunch of people said I was crazy. I said they were going to have the worst record in the division, and it's looking like that might happen. Again, it was so, to me, when Vegas just puts the Lions as favorites out of nowhere, it just made me love the Lions. So we've been pretty darn accurate with most of our divisions. We have the Dolphins winning over the Bills, so that's looking pretty good. Although the Bills are looking pretty good, they obviously beat the Dolphins pretty bad. They so far have that tiebreak. I think overall the Dolphins have had a more impressive reign, if you will, over the first 5 weeks. We've been doing pretty good with our AFC and NFC North. We kind of nailed. I still think it's going to be seed 1 Lions, seed 2 Packers, seed 3 Bears, seed 4 Vikings. Vikings get Caleb. That's just a theory. But anyway, Chiefs are clearly making the playoffs, and they have a very interesting rivalry. They have the the, from 3 years ago, Tyreek Hill left. They talked about how Tua was better, and we never really got to see these two teams play. Last year, I loved it for the playoffs. I did, and they didn't wind up meeting up, and I thought that was odd. And this year, I think it's definitely going to happen, because what's the narrative around Mahomes? The narrative is he doesn't have a receiver. He's Superman out there, and on the narrative for the Dolphins is Tyreek is a cheat code. Just close your eyes and bomb it down the field. He'll get to it. So, very contrasting narratives, but also very, very interesting and appealing if they meet up against each other. And then, of course, the question will become who is more helpful? Did they need Hill? Or is Mahomes that good that he could be good with any group of receivers? Well, what happened with Tom Brady? There was never an instance where a receiver left, even Randy Moss, and he just started playing worse. No matter who they plugged in, that guy played better. Rasheed Caldwell, they did it with Welker, obviously. They did it with Edelman. They've done it with countless receivers. So that's what they're doing with Mahomes here. No matter who gets plugged in, they're going to be successful. So I have no doubt now that probably in the second round, it might be the first round, probably the second round, we're going to see the Miami Dolphins versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, if the Dolphins win, and let's just say they advance, win the championship, does Dolphins-Niners make sense? I don't think it does. You have some similarities. There's actually a Samoan connection because The Rock and Roman Reigns, Reigns is technically from Florida. The Rock's technically from California, but he reps Miami, as does Reigns. But the Usos are from San Francisco. It's really interesting. Tua's obviously Samoan. The Rock has talked about how he's like a Samoan brother. So there is a small connection between, and I believe there's a Samoan player on San Francisco as well. I think he's like, they said he was basically like the protege of Palamalu. But anyway, you could see Miami, San Francisco, but I honestly believe at this point, especially because it's something Pat McAfee said toward the end of last season, when it was going to be the Chiefs-Eagles, he said, the fans are all convinced that it's scripted now, and they're building a new dynasty for Patrick Mahomes. And we kind of knew that, but I thought, okay, then they'll have them take a year off, and then they'll get back to business. Since the way they started and the way they're looking and the way they're being portrayed, again, with Taylor Swift, that involvement's interesting. And the fact that it really is just Mahomes, Kelsey, and a couple other guys. I think they're pushing the Chiefs here. And what we're going to see is what they tried to push last year, but it was unsuccessful. Last year, they tried to push the, quote, underdog Chiefs against the Eagles and say, oh, man, the Chiefs, they got everything. They got an injured quarterback. Some players are banged up. It's going to be Mahomes, against the MVP, the team that almost went undefeated. They really did a good job of trying to convince people that the Chiefs were underdogs when they obviously were not. Nobody is ever going to see the Chiefs as underdogs, just like nobody ever saw Brady as an underdog. But a good way to do that is what they can do with the Super Bowl. If we get, and I'm starting to believe this is where they're heading with it because it's the only thing that makes sense, the Chiefs versus an unstoppable 49ers team, then people will say, oh man, Mahomes is the best. Even if he doesn't win the game, if he's able to hang with this ridiculous team where he's going to be getting harassed the entire game and he's going to have to play Superman on so many plays, avoid Bosa, avoiding Warner, all these different guys that are being pushed as ridiculous superstars, and they are good players. But they're being treated, again, reminds me of the Legion of Boom. Just the way it's just like a known fact that this defense is going to clobber you. To me, Mahomes is the only guy that makes sense to go up against the Niners. And there's a little bit of tie-ins with Brady if you think about it. Mahomes' last Super Bowl, he just obviously won, but before that he played Brady in obviously 2020, I believe it was. Brady, diehard Niners fan growing up. Purdy is kind of being labeled as the new Brady because he was drafted late. But Mahomes is really the new Brady because he's the guy that the whole league is behind. So it's almost like Brady's two sons are going against each other. I guess Jimmy G would be like the redheaded stepchild in this situation. But it does make sense to me. Now, it's not first versus last, but it is Mr. Irrelevant versus the best quarterback in the NFL by a country mile. So it is still a narrative. And he could play, I thought about this as well. In the NFL division matchup, we can get Lions and Niners. So we could still get first versus last with Goff. Or Yeah, I think he'd be the only guy that would qualify right now. Trying to run through the NFC and see who makes sense. Dak wasn't on first overall, so I mean, I guess they could wind up starting Lance, and that would be an interesting story. But I think we might see Chiefs versus Lions, or not Lions, Niners versus Lions, and that would be a story for the Lions. At the beginning of the year, I said I thought they were going to go and make a run to the probably the NFC Championship. They really made sense to me. I really don't think they're going to represent the Super Bowl. I just don't see it this year. But looking at the AFC and being fair, the Jets, they could do something with them, but even if they do, and they're able to hang on, get in the playoffs with Rodgers just coming back, are they really going to sell us on this team is suddenly good enough to go toe-to-toe with the Niners? I don't think it's going to happen. The Chiefs, it makes sense. Now, they lost the first week of the season. They won a couple non-convincing games. The public is probably not loving the Chiefs like prior years, yet they're still a Vegas favorite. You'd think there'd be a lot of teams ahead of them. I would think there'd be like 3 teams ahead. I think people would be hammering up until this point, even though the Cowboys got hit pretty hard. The Niners, Eagles, and Cowboys probably all over the Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs have Mahomes, obviously, and they've looked fine. But again, they haven't played any crazy good teams. So it's interesting. Once we get to, they've talked about it before, you see once they get to about week 7, it starts getting a little bit tougher. But I also find it interesting they don't play the Niners this year. I get they're in different conferences, but they played once last year. They're obviously the 2 biggest draws in the NFL. It's interesting that they're not playing each other. They're playing the Eagles, so it makes me feel like that's going to be their grudge match. Eagles might win that game. But yeah, I think this is a perfect way to explain away how the Chiefs can be a team that can hang with the 49ers. And then wins, which at that point we'll see where we're at. If it does wind up being Chiefs-Niners, Mahomes won the first one. I have a feeling Niners would win. But if Mahomes won, it's an interesting story because you have an actual underdog where you can say, man, this guy, he's by far the best quarterback. He came out of nowhere, and not out of nowhere, but he had an ankle injury, and he got his team back to the Super Bowl and beat a decisively better team who basically has him beat in every metric: receivers, running back, defense, just everywhere. And I'm going to go into that. If you look at these stats, Chiefs are doing well this year, as you can see. 26 points, giving up 16. And I don't go into stats because I don't think they mean anything. But when you see them like this, it's just evident that they're really trying to position the Niners as so much better than any other team. How much they're winning by. Again, the only thing that it gives me is 2007 Patriots vibes. So I really don't feel like at this point, even if there's going to be money on the Niners, they're only getting 2-1 to win. And you can just see that's in one game, sorry. They're only getting 2-1 to win the NFC Championship. So people might be taking them, but they're not going to hammer a future bet where you're only getting 2-1. So even that makes me feel like they're probably going to wind up winning the NFC Championship still, because it's not like they're getting 4.5-1 and Vegas is going to be paying out a lot of money. 2-1, you just need 50% of the people to take any other team, and Vegas is basically fine. So you look at these, how ridiculously superior the Niners look, averaging 8 more points a game than the Chiefs, doing better on defense. I think the Chiefs' third down efficiency was slightly better. Look at the 6.66. I wonder if that's a coincidence for the 4th down. So it's just very interesting. And again, it's not even close. I mean, it reminds me of again, the Patriots when they got Moss. Only in this case, it's when the Niners got McCaffrey. So they're pushing this ridiculous streak, and the streak's interesting because I've gone into a million times how I think it's related to wrestling, and this WrestleMania is going to be in Philly. So it's an interesting thing because obviously the Niners' last loss, even though it was the only loss Purdy started technically, and they lost when he got hurt, was against Philly. So it's an interesting thing, and then obviously Brock is the one who ended the streak in wrestling. He ended Taker's streak. So it's an interesting commonality in my opinion. Now, if the Niners are going to go undefeated this year, I'm honestly wondering. I really am. Now, they play the Browns this week, 5-point spread, so it's a little interesting. I think it might be a win, no cover. And then they're going to be, after that, I think Purdy would be going for his 13th straight. or it's going to be for his 13th straight. So I know he's going to get that because it's his number. I can't imagine he won't get that. But yeah, I'm curious what you guys think. To me, the only way this makes sense is if they line up the 49ers against the Chiefs. You see they're playing the Bengals, they're playing the Jags, they're playing a lot of teams in the AFC, but they're not playing the Chiefs. They're playing the Ravens. And it doesn't mean we can't get a rematch. We get rematches a lot. But I just feel like this is a great way of us not really seeing it. Okay, Chiefs are kind of quiet this year. They're just doing what they should be doing, kind of giving me Warriors vibes. The Niners look like the obvious team. And again, the obvious team makes it a lot. Last year, the Eagles were the, quote, obvious team, and they made it. So, not by the metric of, storylines and things of that nature. Afterwards, it kind of made sense because of the Kelsey Bowl. But just as far as running roughshod on the league. And this year, it's the Niners. So, sure, they can make the playoffs and get upset by, I don't know, the Cowboys in a grudge match. I personally don't think they're going to play the Cowboys again in this playoffs. I think it'll be next year they play again. They could get upset by the Eagles. I mean, anyone could. The Lions, I guess. I just don't see it happening. I think it's a foregone conclusion at this point that it's going to be the Niners. And again, I like them anyway. So the fact that they're looking so good. Last year when they got McCaffrey, I had the same issue. I was like, wow, I love the Niners. Then they got McCaffrey. Now I'm not so sure. I think that's why they didn't do it last year. So a lot of people got on them last year, got pretty good odds, and then the Eagles wound up doing it. This year, I think it will be the Niners. But, again, I'm convinced now it's going to be Patrick Mahomes. Again, he's the face of the league. And it's the one opportunity where you can genuinely say, okay, Mahomes is going up against a better team. He's going to have to be Superman to win this game. Unlike the Eagles, where nobody was really saying he has to be Superman to win that game. It was really the fake sprained ankle that they pushed that game. So they pushed his toughness. They pushed his resilience and his ability to come in the clutch. But they haven't had Mahomes in a matchup where most of the betting public is going to be against him. So, the Bills are the only team that even kind of makes sense, but they're not trying to push Josh Allen that way. I felt like if the Bills got matched up against the Niners in the Super Bowl, it would bode very badly for the Bills. Chiefs-Niners, I feel like, is not only a complete ratings draw, but it makes the most sense for Patrick Mahomes. So that's what I'm thinking we get. I'm thinking we get something to the effect of Chiefs get in the playoffs. They wind up playing the Dolphins. We get the Holmes versus Tua and also Mahomes versus Hill rivalry. Chiefs are able to win that game, but they look a little bit weak. Meanwhile, the Niners are just running through teams. That's what I think is going to happen. And they'll probably find a way to make the Super Bowl a ridiculous line where it's like 2 points when it should be like a 6-point line favoring the Niners. That way they can't pay the public out too much. Because, again, if the Chiefs are getting like 2-1 or better, the public is going to be all over that. But I genuinely believe we're going to see Niners versus Chiefs. And, again, this time we might get a reversal. Again, we can always talk about the Super Bowl when we get to it. But picking the exact matchup can pay pretty good odds. I'd imagine this one isn't crazy. I'd imagine the exact odds on this is probably like 8-1, 10-1 for it to be the Niners Chiefs. Because both teams are like the favorites in their respective conferences right now. So it's not going to be anything crazy. But I still think it's worth playing. And just thinking about it, I thought about this for a few days. It was ever since the Cowboys got throttled. I've been thinking about what makes sense here. And to me, the only thing that makes sense, again, you can have a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars get there, Ravens get there. But then what's honestly going to happen? How are they going to explain away the Niners just falling apart? I don't think you'd have the Niners look this strong and just run through so many teams. And again, it's early in the season, so I guess we'll know maybe by week 12 if they're definitely going to continue this trend. But I don't see it stopping outside of an injury. Outside of either multiple injuries to the team or a single injury to Brock Purdy. I don't even think an injury to McCaffrey would do it, to be honest. A fake injury. That's how they explain this stuff away. But it's just, I don't think they would be wasting this time. Now, they play the Ravens on Christmas. That's going to be a big draw. Probably a close game. Who knows? Maybe the Niners get their first loss then. But I still genuinely believe that this team is being built, especially with Brock's streak. At this point, I'm wondering if he runs it up to when Undertaker's streak ended, which would be like another 11 games, which would basically be the entire season. So he got to 2021, I believe. So the whole thing's really interesting. Like I said, it's fascinating. And the more I think about it, again, before the season, I did think the Chiefs were going to have a cool-off year. I'm starting to wonder, again, if that'll be next year, because I do believe when Mahomes gets his Super Bowls, they're going to be in bunches. I thought he'd get there, miss it this year, and then get back a couple more times. I'm thinking now maybe he gets it this year and then misses next year. So that's really the only change as far as I still think he's going to get the Brady treatment where he misses a playoff at some point in his career. But the way he's being pushed, and again, I think they don't want him to be outshined by Caleb, with Caleb coming into the league. So it would make perfect sense, in my opinion, to have Mahomes still look like the king of the league and be the only guy that makes sense to go up against this ridiculous 49ers team. It's also a rematch. I know a lot of people talked about the rematch. It's the Niners Ravens and the Niners Chiefs are like the two main rematches, and the only one that I thought made some sense was Niners Bills. Outside of the Ravens, who I liked. So yeah, that's my official pick right now. Is we're going to see the Niners and Chiefs go to the Super Bowl. I know it might sound a little bit obvious, but again, sometimes they give us obvious. And just looking at the tie-ins, you see Brady everywhere. They're talking about Belichick here. But the tie-ins to Brady being his favorite team being the Niners, and again, Mahomes being Brady 2.0, Purdy also being pitched as a Brady-type player. The prospect of Purdy versus the face of the league when they every week they just refuse to admit Brock Purdy's good, it has a lot of appeal to it. And then you throw in the fact, again, this is a big deal to me, that Mahomes has never been considered a big underdog. Maybe against the Bucs, people had the Bucs, but I don't think so. I think more people were on the Chiefs, and they're never going to be considered really an underdog because of Mahomes. But you get a game like this where the team's got you beat by every single metric and in every position outside of quarterback, and I think even the tight end you can call a coin flip. It's going to be really tough to get people to see the Chiefs here as a favorite. They're going to see, man, it's Mahomes versus the world. So, yeah, pretty, like I said, to me, it's as the season's going on, it seems to unveil itself, and that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing there's only one man for the job here, and it's going to be their golden boy, Pat Mahomes. So, as of now, Chiefs-Niners is my pick. Again, since the beginning of the year, I had the Niners winning the Super Bowl. That's still not changing. I just think you have to have a guy that is on a different level to go up against this team, and I don't think Josh Allen's quite good enough. The Jags make no sense to me, and I think they're going to pull the rug on Lamar. He might do okay, but I do think he's going to wind up going somewhere else next year. I don't know if he did sign a contract or not. I think he might have, but I still don't think they're going to be. It doesn't seem like a team that the NFL is really getting behind. So it could be to lull us to sleep, and then they come out of nowhere and start looking amazing. That's certainly a possibility. But I think we're going to get the standard Superman versus super team, and that's going to draw better than anything else as well. I'm sure Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift will play a role at some point. I actually mentioned, I said something's going to happen with her not there. He'll probably get hurt, and he did get hurt. But then he came back and had a great game. So, that wasn't exactly the best prediction, but I did find that pretty interesting. It was almost like the ghost of Taylor Swift hurt him because he was just running a route and just fell down. So, looked like his knee buckled, but then he got up and did some weird sprinting exercise, and he wasn't even limping. So, I think that was all for show. But yeah, you can let me know what you think. If you think it's going to be something more symbolic. I know a lot of people think because of the skull and bones, we might get something more symbolic. I think we're just going to get an as-advertised Super Bowl, and again, it's a perfect way to push the golden boy. He's the only thing he hasn't done is go against a team that's clearly better and have to do everything himself, essentially. He's always had something. Even last year, they keep talking about it. At least he stole a Juju last year, This year, he doesn't even have that. So, I'm wondering if we get a Kelce injury or something of that nature. I don't think they would injure him, but Mahomes, literally himself against the Niners, would be a pretty entertaining Super Bowl. And they'd probably find a way to make it, of course, an overtime game or a 3-point game. So, yeah, I'm going to go into Dion. I'm going to go into some college games, obviously this week's schedule. But I wanted to get this out because I don't have a lot of time to get future videos in a lot of times between all the college games. We have NBA coming up. We got tennis, which I try and cover, and then obviously the NFL. But when I do see stories that look like they're in the making, David versus Goliath stories, They tried to sell us on the underdog Chiefs last year. Nobody bought it. Like, you had Kelsey saying, nobody thought we could do it. And then he's getting ratioed on Twitter by people like, what are you talking about? It's like Deion saying nobody wanted us to win. It's just, when you have a stale, inorganic narrative, people don't really buy it too much. They start actually rejecting it. And in this case, it would actually be a true narrative if they were like, yeah, nobody thought Mahomes could beat the Niners. Now, I'm not saying he's going to beat them, but that's going to be the story when he plays them, if he can beat them. And I just don't see another team that could play that role of the David in this case, where, again, they did it with the Warriors a couple times, where they're like, oh yeah, nobody thought the Warriors and their 3 future Hall of Famers could win. And they even had, Iggy, they had Durant at one point. But they love to push that story, like the best team, the team that's clearly the chosen team. They push them as the dogs. In this case, they would be. So, after thinking over everything, yeah, not much has changed in my playoffs. Still like the Lions, still like the Jags, still like outside of the Giants, the entire NFC East to get in. It will probably be, I'm guessing, the Seahawks or the Packers that get that 7th seed instead of the Giants, of course. Falcons, like them. Still like the Ravens to get in there. I just don't think they're going to go to the Super Bowl. And, yeah, I like the Chiefs are mine, and I like the Dolphins to win the division still. So not much has changed, except I do think we're going to get Chiefs versus Dolphins. I think that's too good of a story not to give us. And then, to me, Chiefs versus Mahomes, I should say, versus Purdy is a pretty interesting story. You have the guy that, again, the face of the league versus the guy that they're saying isn't, he's Mr. Irrelevant. He was never going to play. And now he's going to be playing a Super Bowl against the Mahomes. So I think all of it really lines up well. And it's going to be the biggest draw, too. So there's not many years where you see a team do this. Like, even when the Eagles did it last year, they were not looking like this. To me, the last time we saw this was the Patriots, when they just ran roughshod. And they'll probably get the Niners a loss or two with an excuse, because they probably don't want to mess with the streak. But, yeah, I think we're going to see Niners-Chiefs. Just makes the most sense to me. So let me know if you agree, or if you think it's maybe you don't think the Niners are going to make it because they're looking too strong. I could definitely see that perspective. I had that theory last year. They got McCaffrey, and I think this year at 2-1 to win the championship, even if they do get a lot of money on the Niners, they're not going to necessarily be paying out the public unless you get more than 50% of the handle on that one team, which you might get, sure. But again, there's a lot of ways Vegas can make money. So I'm just curious if people see that the Lions at 10-1, 12-1, they're going to be way more intrigued. Okay, I'll take that. Maybe get one lucky win. Maybe we don't have to play the Niners, and we're getting 12-1 versus 2-1, which you can get in any weekly game almost. So it's not great future odds, which makes me like them. And again, the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl, very interesting odds, which tells me that they're definitely going to be at least in the AFC Championship, and that's why I like them to win it. If they're going to go that far, I think it only makes sense for them to play the Niners in a fake David versus Goliath. And it just, to me, what makes the most sense. Also kind of interesting, you have 3 main mint companies. One's Denver. Well, mint, I should say mint, where there's the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint. So it would be interesting. I remember people said when Mahomes beat Philly, it had some kind of thought it tied into the natives and it tied into the financial system. It would be interesting if Mahomes took out the 2 mints. And he plays the 3rd mint this week, actually. He plays Russell Wilson on primetime. But, yeah, it'd be interesting watching Mahomes play Philly and San Francisco. They're the 2 main mint companies in the United States. So that's interesting. I found that to be an interesting little commonality. And the other one, obviously, the Nuggets just won. So we might be seeing some symbolism from financial issues and political issues involved. But again, from a story perspective, from a wrestling perspective, which is how I cover football, and we usually do pretty good, to me, Mahomes versus the unbeatable Niners makes the most sense. So I'll be going into the rest of the games this week. I say it a lot, but we had 2 weeks in a row where we started off really good, and then just rough ends where we just got nailed on the primetime games. A couple games at the 4 o'clock swung on us. I don't foresee that this week. I looked at some of these lines, and they just look absolutely absurd. And each week we are getting a little more over the target as far as how they're pushing these teams. A lot of good college plays this week because of teams that have not won on the spread or they're undefeated on the spread. So public will be obviously fading the ones that are bad on the spread, taking the ones that are good on the spread. We'll be doing the opposite. But there's going to be a good bit of plays this week. I looked at about 10 college games just off the top of my head that I liked. Not the top of my head, but just glancing at the spreads. So we'll probably have about a dozen college plays. And for the NFL, I think I got 5 plays just off the spread. You know, like teams like Saints that haven't gone over. Teams like the Broncos, I think the Broncos finally got covered. But there's teams that haven't covered. Panthers haven't covered yet all year. So there's a lot of, I don't think the Giants have covered all year. So there's a lot of teams that are definitely going to, they're not going to all break history. Like I said, even in really outlier years where we have like one team that's especially bad, they still finish like 37% against the spread. You're not going to see a team finish 15-20% against the spread in the NFL. So knowing that, it really helps. Okay, this team's 0-6 against the spread. We're going to take them. More often than not, they're going to win. They're not going to finish 2 or 3 or something against the spread, especially more than one team. There's usually like one team that does it. So I'll get into the spreads, but this was more of a future video. And like I said, yeah, I could say it a million different ways, but the underdog Mahomes, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's the truth here, versus the San Francisco 49ers is what I think they have booked for this year's Super Bowl. So let me know what you think, and if you think it's going to be something like that, or if you think they're going to head us in a different direction. Take care and happy earnings.